He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
If you're looking for stay off my operating table, you're in the right place. If that's not what you're looking for, you ought to stay around anyway, because this one's going to be good. This is Dr. Philip Ovadia with the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. And our guest today, actually, I'm not Dr. Philip Ovadia. If you're listening, you might not realize that. Philip, take it away, man.
You have the voice for podcasting that I don't quite have, but hopefully I bring something to this show, right? Besides just my name. All right. Really, again, I think I say this every week, but, really excited again. We have an amazing guest lineup. Travis Statham. I had to get that pronounced. Travis and I think first crossed paths in the digital world probably about 5 years ago, 2019, 2020. Travis was doing a lot of work on sort of collating the literature, the world's literature around the carnivore diet. At the time, I was helping Sean Baker out. He was just getting Meat RX launched, and we were pulling together some of the literature as well. Travis and I kind of teamed up on a lot of that stuff. But here we are 5 years later, and Travis has just completed his Master's of Science degree in nutritional science. Just had his master's thesis, actually, we found out a few minutes before this, officially approved, I guess, accepted. I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Travis's background. And I think this is going to be a fascinating episode because at this point, Travis may know more about the carnivore diet than just about anyone on earth. So Travis, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience? Maybe tell them how you got interested in the carnivore diet, what led to some of that earlier work, and then we can kind of work our way through the latest developments.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Travis Statham. I grew up on the East Coast of America and went to undergraduate school, and then I did computer science, and I worked in the tech industry for 10 years in New York City. And then 3 years ago, I became so interested in nutrition. Actually, around 2012, I read Gary Taub's book and became super interested in nutrition, and then kept that as a hobby throughout the years. And then I decided I was kind of sick and tired of New York City and wanted to move out after COVID. So my wife and I moved to Utah, and I decided to do a master's degree at Utah State University. My advisor, Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, was asking for people who are interested, and he has a lot of interesting work between grass-fed and grain-fed beef. And I thought that could be a good fit for me. I came out here and we built a house and now live in Utah, so it's kind of crazy. And yeah, so the master's degree just got finished basically 20 minutes ago. I just got the email, and my thesis is 150 pages long, has 30 or 40 figures in it and 10 tables, and took a really long time to write because it also has so much data. Just organizing all the data was a process in itself. Yeah, and then I got interested in the carnivore diet back in 2017. Sean Baker got it popularized then. So I became a moderator in the World Carnivore Tribe group, and then kind of stayed in the movement. I went to Carnivory Con in 2019, and then Low Carb Denver in 2020, and then COVID kind of hit and ended that. And I've also been a moderator on Reddit, and I have this thing called Zotero, which is like a graduate database that holds research articles that graduate students use to write their research articles. So I actually started using that before I went to graduate school, and I have 14,000 articles in that. And they could always be organized better, but it's just like a start on what I want to bring to the table when it comes to science. This nutrition angle, it requires so many facets of health and knowledge to really understand.
Do you suppose, Travis, that adopting a carnivore diet is simply, not exclusively, but is primarily just a reaction to the complexity of getting diet right? I know I've been tempted to just say, screw it, I'm just going to eat meat and just stop trying to think about all the other stuff.
I think for a percentage of people, like a quarter, maybe 10% or so might have that. It is like a very simple elimination diet where you just jump in and don't really have to think about a lot of things. And we did surveys and we know that question. So it is kind of in that
Ah,
range. And I mean, I could try and find it more accurately, but I'm saying like, yeah, like people are that way. I mean, it's also like younger people that like aren't really super sick or don't have a lot of metabolic diseases. They're interested, they might have some basic heartburn or, bad sleep or something, or they could lose 20 pounds. Those people could try carnivore for 3 months and be like, wow, this is great. And then know that they have that tool in their pocket if they want to return to that best health.
So what was it for you? I know you mentioned that you kind of came across Gary Taubes, who amazingly seems to be, an entry point for lots and lots of people in metabolic health these days because of all of his amazing work. But, I would say a lot of people probably read his stuff and don't go down the route or don't put it into practice. And those that do, certainly they don't all make it kind of all the way to carnivore, we'll say. So
Mm.
what was it for you that kind of got you interested in it to start with and then kind of kept you down that path and ultimately led you to carnivore?
So, like, I did basically a carnivore keto when I was 23, right out of college and working in New York for the first time. I only had 20 pounds to lose there, but I wasn't really like trying to eat plants on purpose. So, I was doing like some kind of dirty keto kind of carnivore diet, probably like before it was even a real concept. And then, but I still believe the hype about fiber and like fruits and vegetables being necessary for some nutritional reasons. So I think I would still try and eat them. And then when Sean Baker started talking about the carnivore diet, and I realized there was actually like a long history in Facebook of 10 years plus of these people like actually putting this diet into practice. And I realized that those people were basing their experience off of hundreds of years of people doing the carnivore diet by necessity as explorers or as, survivors in the Arctic or just ethnic tribes living their native ways and eating primarily a carnivore diet. Yeah, does that answer it?
Yeah, I think, so it sounds like you weren't maybe, a lot of people that we have on this podcast, practitioners and non-practitioners, they have specific health challenges that they're trying to overcome that leads it to them. It sounds like for you, you just discovered it to be a generally healthy way of being. And then when you started sort of diving into the history, you've kind of figured out that this is something that people have been doing for a long period of time and just makes sense from a health standpoint.
Yeah, so I'm not that old. I'm only 35 now, and I only had like minimal weight to lose and really not too many chronic health issues other than the weird allergies I've had over the years. So, like, carnivore isn't necessary for me. I feel like for some people, they're abstainers and they really need to be like fully on carnivore in some fashion to kind of be their best self. But I also don't have like type 2 diabetes or something. So for me, I think it was just like a interesting toolbox I could have in my toolbox. And then I believe in the hope and the value of it. So when I see amazing stories from other people who have tried other diets and didn't find that success, and then finally tried carnivore, and for whatever reason whether it eliminates every plant product or one particular plant product, or it's just meat, or it's a low omega value in meat. So something is playing a role that's helping them out. And I'd like to understand why that is. One reason is I just think it's more like the natural diet that humans evolved into over millions of years. And we should expect that. That should be like the state of health that people should be, demanding to have and and achieving normally. And then this state of chronic disease that the world is in now is what we should expect from a high plant-based diet with lots of sugar and seed oils. So yeah, I kind of think like we shouldn't be that surprised in the state that we've gotten ourselves into.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective because, admittedly, a lot of us come at this from the, you know, carnivore or low carb diets more broadly are a great way to treat diseases, right? And fix problems that people have in their health. And, it's great to hear someone who's kind of coming at it from the other perspective of this just makes sense as the best way to maintain health. And, it makes sense for people that aren't, do it before you get the problems as opposed to, waiting till you have the problems to implement this, the preventative as instead of the reactive approach. And, that's something that more and more many of us practitioners in the space are looking to do, right? Be more preventative rather than reactive. And I think being able to extend this message out to, don't wait till you have the problems. And it just makes sense to eat this way because, it's been demonstrated throughout human history. It's a great perspective to bring to this.
Yeah, it really is. And my generation, I'm 35. I'm starting to see it in my, friends or just people out in public. They're starting to have the chronic disease, but they don't have it so bad yet that they need to do a radical, diet like carnivore. So I don't know if we're going to really be able to, grab a hold of those people in this early stage. They're just not going to want to listen. It's a big commitment.
Yeah, it's the mid 30s when you start to pay for not paying attention for your entire adulthood. I was an exceptionally slender person, and I woke up one morning, I think I was 34. I was feeling my middle, and there's this roll around there that it seemed like it came up overnight. Obviously it didn't, but it was just like, because for the previous 33 years, I ate anything and everything as much and as often and as in whatever quantities that I chose, and it was definitely not healthy. And that's when it started for me, was the mid 30s. Okay, something's no longer working.
But even if you have that realization, it could take another 5 years of learning to get used to it, and then being like, maybe I'm okay with it, and then being like, oh, it's actually really bad. It's hindering my life now. And then you're 45, and then
Yeah.
you have at least something. Yeah.
Hey, I'm working on a presentation for a group of people who actually it's the partners in my marketing firm. We are not, focused on health and healthcare. And one of the things I'm discussing in this very brief presentation is seed oils. You mentioned a couple of things introducing yourself about seed oils and root veggies, goofy ideas about those things. Just kind of expand on that if you don't mind. Either one, I don't care. Root vegetables or seed oils. What has your research revealed as well as probably personal experience revealed?
All right. So I think the seed oils issue is like the most interesting and important in nutrition right now. I originally got into the scene through low carb and ketogenic diets, right? So they're very low carb, 20 grams of carbs or less. You can do that with a carnivore diet, etc. When you do a carnivore or keto diet with a lot of animal fat, you generally have low amounts of seed oil. So you're not eating like soybean oil, you're not frying anything, you're not eating like refined grains in fried foods, all that stuff. So the whole time the keto movement has been being successful, they've also kind of implicitly cut out seed oils and not really given them any credit. So the whole time, like, it could have been really that and not just low carb doing the help. Now I run this subreddit called Stop Eating Seed Oils. That's 43,000 people. There is a consensus that seed oils are very healthy for you. And this consensus comes from Heart Healthy. It comes from the American Heart Association. That institution has been propped up, I would say, by Procter & Gamble, who is a company that was making Crisco and Heart Healthy seed oil products in the 1950s. And that funding hasn't really changed. So to me, when everyone says the consensus is based on the AHA, to me, I'm saying the AHA's consensus is based on what the seed oil companies want you to think.
Who writes the checks?
Who writes the checks? Yes. I mean, you can go into the meta-analyses and studies and the human trials, and they do show a slight benefit to seed oils in humans. But then you can go into the mechanistic studies and look up at this molecule called 4-HNE, 4-hydroxynonenal. And it's like a toxic aldehyde that breaks down from linoleic acid, which is the omega-6 fat in seed oils. And this 4-HNE molecule it's like wildfire. It's like this erosive chemical that just bonds to everything and then turns it on fire and starts chain reactions and stuff. It's like hard to describe, but so we're eating these seed oils that then kind of evolve into those chemicals. And then that just sets off chain reactions in our body. And we should expect all sorts of diseases to be coming out of that.
To be clear,
You know,
the chain reactions you're talking about are essentially all fall into the category of inflammation, correct?
they're lipid peroxidation reactions, oxidative stress. So the oxygen radicals are carrying the reaction forward. And these molecules are like the seed oils are very susceptible to the oxidative stress damage. And then they cause all these aldehydes to form. And then this like onslaught of molecules that we like barely are starting to understand the tip of. But it all gets grouped up as oxidative stress. And if you look that up on PubMed over time, it's like one of the most like researched fields. Also, a lot of drugs work on oxidative stress. They block the transmitter that the omega-6 seed oils do. So they kind of work along the same pathway.
I don't understand anything you've told me practically. I mean, I love it that you know all the chemistry, but
yeah, a lot of diseases come from oxidative stress, and seed oils have this mechanistic path that leads to oxidative stress. A lot of our pharmaceutical efforts are aimed at undoing oxidative stress or trying to prevent oxidative stress. And, it seems like a very obvious conclusion, right? That seed oils are bad for our health. Yet, the consensus is the exact opposite. You mentioned the human trials around seed oils. What I think is interesting about the human trials on seed oils is the main benefit that has been shown from consuming seed oils as a substitute for saturated fat in the diet, animal fats, is that your LDL cholesterol level goes down. And, right. What's accepted as fact, but I would say is not really truly fact and is actually quite contentious, is whether or not that's actually good for your health. And, that part kind of gets glossed over. And the other thing about the human trials around seed oils we know is that they've been very biased, very selective. Probably the best done, most comprehensive randomized trial around seed oil consumption didn't show positive results. And that study was buried for, 20, 30 years. And, the results of it when they finally got out were really kind of, they didn't get publicized real well. And by the time they had been released, the train was already so far down the track of the,
Yeah.
seed oils are good for your health that it just hasn't had the effect that it should have.
Yeah, those are the Ramsden studies.
Can you guys articulate specifically why seed oils are now in so many foods?
I can. Yeah.
I'm not talking about the safflower oil you pour in your frying pan. I'm talking about you go to the store, you look at the back of you look at the ingredient list on almost anything, and it's got one of these seed oils in it. Why?
So they invented this packaging, I think, in the 90s that allowed nitrogen to be packed inside the package. And then that prevented oxidation. So then you could now use high PUFA fats in your packaged products and not have them oxidize, because the nitrogen would be in there and it wouldn't have oxygen that could oxidize the fat.
Let me make sure I understand this. So prior to this particular kind of packaging, oxygen would get inside the package. And if these seed oils were in the product at that point, then the product itself would oxidize and obviously, at the very least, be unappetizing.
They go rancid, basically.
It'd go rancid.
Yeah.
But by being able to package it in a way that they could suck all the oxygen out, replace the oxygen with nitrogen, the seed oil, which was in there, would not oxidize and the food would not spoil or go rancid. But that still doesn't say why the seed oil's in there to begin with. Why is it there?
So it's in there because the companies wanted it to be there to replace the animal fats and the coconut oil and palm oil. So they wanted the government to basically say, like, our seed oils, our soybean oil, our high linoleic acid oils, they come from plants that are temperate, which means they're like in colder areas. They have more of these high PUFA fats because it helps with,
PUFA
like,
is polyunsaturated fatty acids, right?
yeah, basically just think of it, each time there's more PUFA, there's a new kink in the chain. And the fatty acid, like, it starts straight. So a saturated fat is like straight. And then when you add a double bond, it kinks at 30 degrees or so. So when you add all these kinked chains, like, then the fatty acid like turns in on itself. And it can have 5 or 6 of these double bonds in it. And then there's all these kinks in the chain. But it increases the susceptibility to oxidation because all those joints are basically exposed, and then the oxygen come along and bump into it and then spark a reaction and cause all this other stuff to basically go on.
Oh man, we should totally have a video a video illustration of this right now.
Yeah, and there are some animations that I could think of to show you, but it's basically just think of oxygen as when you add it to a fire, right? It makes it heat up and gets way stronger. So that power is basically what our bodies run on as mitochondria. It's a very effective fuel. But when it is around these fragile fats, they're prone to oxidation, and then you get metabolic disease over a time.
And the fragile fats are primarily these seed oils, polyunsaturated.
Yeah, so to help you understand, like, the full context, like, beef fat is 50% saturated fat, 40% monounsaturated fat, which means it has one kink in the chain, and then 5% or so polyunsaturated fat. In seed oils, it's 80% polyunsaturated fat, and it's 50 to 70% of the linoleic acid fat. So in beef fat, linoleic acid is 2 to 5%. In seed oils, it's 50 to 75%. So that fat is like 10 to 20 times more of this highly fragile fat that humans just haven't evolved to eat. And we do have ways to basically handle this fragile fat that is in animal products, right? That it would have been in our carnivore diets if we were eating them for the last 4 million years. But it wouldn't have gone over 5% really. Even you hunt a mega 8,000 kilogram, elephant or something, all the fat inside of it is still never going to have 50% LA. It would be low proof of fat basically. And unless you're compressing seeds and extracting the oil, you're not going to find a high LA food in like any other natural source, except for magongo nuts, which is a fun, like aside. This one tribe in Africa can get insulin resistance and obesity during a certain season when they eat these high LA nuts.
LA
So,
is linoleic acid.
yeah.
Bill warned you, I'm not medical.
I love them. I love hearing about the Mungungo nuts. They are fascinating. Travis, maybe let's go a little bit into, and then this will, I think, lead into your master's thesis. I think people do get confused between, the omega-3, omega-6 distinction. To be clear, they're both polyunsaturated fatty acids, but omega-3s at least seem to have benefits for health, and usually their consumption is encouraged. Omega-6s, more questionable, and as you said, probably have negative effects on health. But talk a little bit, about what is the difference between the omega-3 and omega-6s. They're both polyunsaturated fatty acids, and how should people be thinking about that as they're thinking about health of what they're eating. And then, like I said, I think that will then lead us into maybe what you chose as a topic for your master's.
Okay, so the omega-6 and the omega-3, the omega nomenclature was actually invented by this guy named Ralph Holman. He was like a lipid biochemist back in the 1960s. And he's like, all right, there's the alpha and the omega from the Bible. The omega end of a molecule has like a start and an end, right? Yeah, between the two. At the end, he called that the omega side. And he said, if I count up 3 carbons and then put a double bond there, then that 3 chain at the end will be my omega-3. And if you put the chain 6 carbons up, then that will be an omega-6. The omega-3 and the omega-6 is basically saying you've created a tail at the end of the fatty acid that can't easily change. The tail is, it like fits into machinery, but it doesn't get changed itself. So once you create one of these species, then it will continue down the chain through the metabolization of it. Basically, you have ALA and LA as your 18 carbon ones. And then they each go through a series of steps. And there's 4 main ones. There's LA, GLA, DGLA, and then ARA, which is arachidonic acid. And then on the omega-3 side, you have ALA, which is alpha-linolenic acid, to EPA to DPA to DHA. So DHA and EPA are basically essential omega-3 fatty acids that we need. There's controversy if we really need the ALA, which is the first one, the 18 carbon one. And there's also kind of controversy if we need the 18 chain LA one. If we do, it's only 1% of total energy. The dietary guidelines want us to eat 5 to 10% total energy as LA. It's kind of well agreed upon that the essential amount is 1%, but the real question is how much should you suggest people eat? And if they're going to eat all meat diets, the LA percent is probably like 2 to 3%. But if you want to give them a bunch of chronic diseases, you're going to want them to eat 12% LA. And that's what the world is looking like right now.
Yeah, we, from in practice, we see that average diets in the Western world, like you said, are 10, maybe even up to 15% linoleic acid. So much higher amounts than we would have been consuming in the past. And the ratio between these two, right, the omega-3 and the omega-6, seems to be pretty important. And that ratio historically was probably in the 1 to maybe 4 to 1 at most. And now, routinely, and this is something we test in patients, we'll see numbers like 15 to 1 or 20 to 1 in people, and at least correlates, right? Maybe we don't know quite causation yet, but it very strongly correlates with many of these health problems: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, things like that.
What is that test, Phil? The 15 to 1 or 20 to 1? What are we seeing?
Looking at the ratio between your omega-6s and your omega-3s in the cells. I think the preferred way to test it is looking at cell membranes. Usually red cell membranes is what we look at to determine that.
The cell membranes are made out of fatty acids, so the body then matches the dietary fatty acids to the cell membranes. And the test measures the cell membranes. Yeah.
So if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is that we're literally building our bodies, or at least some of the crucial cells in our bodies, out of fatty acids that are innately toxic to us? Toxic to us?
It's basically precisely what we're saying. That it's almost like the food has hidden TNT inside of it, or some kind of like.
I'm thinking about construction that where you've seen people build houses out of really poorly made bricks, like with really bad cement or really bad, and you can build a wall and it looks fine, but it has no ability to hold up to stress, and it crumbles within very short order, even though the shape and the size and the density, it all is the same as a good. I live in a 70-year-old house that's built out of it's 3 brick layers deep. And, oh my God, this thing it's like a fortress. But I've seen houses built out of really shitty brick. I think that's the technical term, Phil. Shitty brick.
I believe so.
And I've never understood this. We're literally building ourselves with terrible materials, building materials.
They're terrible, but they're also heart healthy.
So the sticker on the label says, let's, like I said, that kind of leads us to what you chose to focus on for your master's thesis. And I'm going to read the title here. It's From Pasture to Plate: Striking an Omega Balance Between Grass-Fed and Grain-Fed Beef Ribeyes, Fatty Acid Composition, Minerals, Soil, and Forage Analysis. And we'll certainly link to this in the show notes, but maybe talk about why you chose to focus on this topic, and then love to hear kind of high level. Like you said, it's 150 pages. There's lots of great data in there, but give us kind of a high level of what you learned. What was novel information that you've been able to bring out there with this thesis?
All right, good. So I want to tie this into your discussion on the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is something I adapted into a new balance, a new metric in this paper. And I laid out the case for it, and it comes from this book named Omega Balance. Have you heard of that? By John Anthony Hulbert. He's an Australian zoologist, and it's a great book. I have it like behind me somewhere, but basically it's N3 divided by total PUFA. So N3 divided by N6 plus N3 times 100. So the nice thing about this is, instead of a ratio, ratios are like, when we're talking about 4 to 1 ratio, that's 4 times as much N6 to N3. A 20 to 1 is 20 times more N6 to N3. But conceptually, you can't really think about, okay, what percentage of the N3 to N6 is in there. So this omega balance switches that around, and it's a proportion now. So what we found in the study is we looked at 250 maybe grass-fed ribeyes and 150 grain-fed ribeyes. And we did fatty acid composition. We like grinded them all up. We put them in like these liquid nitrogen freezers and all these involves steps and whatnot. But we finally did fatty acid analysis on them and put it in this giant spreadsheet and did analysis on that and everything. And basically, the omega balance in grass-fed beef is a 37. So it's 37% N3 fatty acids out of the total PUFAs in the beef itself, which is probably only 3 to 5%. So the PUFAs there, 37, is pretty high. And that maps to a 50 omega balance is a 1-to-1. And a 20 omega balance is that 4-to-1 that we were talking about as like the cutoff for the good amount. Grass-fed beef is like right there in the middle, 37, and grain-fed beef is a 12. So a 12 omega balance is okay. It's a little bit better than what the dietary guidelines want us at, which is about a 10 omega balance. Strangely enough, I calculated that. But if you want an even lower omega balance, which you don't really want, but if you did want one, you would eat grains, seed oils, pork, and chicken. And that's basically the American diet right there. It's all super low omega balance foods. All the fatty acids in the PUFA, or all the PUFA types in the fatty acids, are going to be predominantly omega-6. Predominantly linoleic acid and arachidonic acid, and very little omega-3. And you're going to find omega-3s in your grain-fed beef, a lot more in your grass-fed beef, and then fish and maybe eggs and some other things. Eggs are kind of tricky. They might have a gram of LA per egg. And
So I just want to make sure everyone's kind of understanding this. So the lower the omega balance, basically, the higher percentage of omega-6 linoleic acid that you're getting. And within beef, we see this spread between grass-fed and grass-finished and grain-finished beef. However, the context is that, there's relatively little amounts of polyunsaturated fatty acids in beef to start with.
Right.
So it may not be that big a deal, overall, if you're eating, even if you're eating exclusively red meat, a carnivore diet, the difference between eating all grass finished and grain finished is still going to be relatively low when we look at compared to certainly a standard American diet, and even incorporating non-ruminant animals that are going to have more of these polyunsaturated fats to start with, and they're going to have a higher percentage of the omega-6s within those polyunsaturated fats. Did I get that all?
Yeah, you aced it. And chicken fat might have 20 to 25% PUFA fat, whereas like the beef and the ruminant fats are going to have 5% or less. And the pork fat might be 20%. Yeah, like this isn't a big deal, I guess, if you're not eating a ton of chicken and pork fat, but that's like now the number one most popular meat in America, or poultry, I think. And, people are eating chicken wings and chicken skin and stuff, and that's where all the fat is.
Now, is that because most of the poultry is raised in these horrid factory farms, or is that just innate in these birds?
No, so there's another whole history. Another book I read went into the history of the meat industry. Chicken used to, be like smaller birds, but they've been genetically engineered to have bigger breasts, but they also just are fed soybeans and these certain grains that make them gain weight so they can't even fly. So there's like multiple steps in the process, but it's also like red meat became more challenging. There's less profit margin there. Poultry is kind of easy to do anywhere. You just kind of build a building and stick a bunch of things in, and then they would figure out all the ways to make the process super secure. And they would ship out the eggs one day, and then just expect to have chickens in 20 days, but it's all integrated into the food supply system, and the corn and the soybeans, and that is like the raw food that goes into the chicken industry. But the nice thing that the ruminants have is they can eat the fiber from the grass. So they're not really dependent on the concentrate foods that we need. So basically, we could replace our chickens with more beef cows if by reducing the soybeans that we're growing, and then feeding those cows like the forage that's already out there. Like they can just eat the fiber. They don't need the high energy corn and soy that the chickens do need. And the chickens are basically they've a single stomach too, like humans. So the chickens are getting fat on the diet, and then we're eating the same diet the chickens are and the chickens.
Yeah, I mean, it really does become sort of intuitive when you choose to look at it. So I'm interested, the research that you did for this thesis, how novel is this, right? I would think, or I would hope that the food, industry, we'll call it, farmers maybe, would be testing this type of stuff on their, on the food that they're producing ultimately, the meat and the foods that they're producing. They would want to know, the nutritional composition, the fatty acid composition. But it sounds, what you've demonstrated in your thesis is actually pretty novel information.
So I go back and forth on that. I don't think the data itself is that novel. Like we already knew grass-fed beef was pretty healthy fat-wise, and grain-fed beef was kind of in the middle, and then the other fats are lower. I kind of bring it all together through this omega balance concept. So I also found like the omega balance of megafauna we hunted 20,000 years ago. And I put that in, and that's all like 50 to 70. And then I put like the common
Megafauna,
foods,
God,
mammoths and
woolly mammoths.
mastodons. Yeah. And horses and hippos and stuff.
Hippos are ruminants?
No, but they're fatty animals, and you can almost call them carnivores too. I found one paper that calls them that. If you have another few hours to spare, but
Hippos
yeah,
are carnivores. That'll be a riveting discussion.
yeah. I mean, they are very violent, right, and seem very territorial, and they've been found in plant matter, but they've also been found in fish and large mammals and stuff. I'm just saying that's a whole other discussion. I'm reading this book now called Megafauna about the extinction of the megafauna. And the author is making the case that humans contributed to that and basically followed the largest, fattiest animals around and ate them into extinction. It's kind of this whole topic in general. It's like the earth traded its species richness and biomass and all these herbivores thriving in this giant Eden, and then traded it for these carnivorous apes that just ate everything in sight and established cities and cars and technology. I mean, it's hard to imagine living as we do now, but the landmass 20,000, 30,000 years ago would have been teeming with wildlife we can't imagine, just everywhere. And to me, as a human, we would have been seeing that at all times. We would have been seeing the fattiest, largest animals, and there was nothing stopping you from going out and getting them. Everyone makes the case that Paleolithic people would have been lazy, or they opportunistically come by and see an animal, or only in rare cases would their hunt go well. No, these animals were everywhere, and they would have been easy for apex predators like us to capture them somehow. When you have a hungry kid at home. It's called Megafauna.
Megafauna.
Baz Edmeades. But I run this website called Reddit, and there's these forums that you can build. So I run all these various ones on nutrition and all health and stuff. And one of them is called Metropology. So I've been posting any science articles I can find that basically make the case that humans were high-fat megafauna hunters, 2 million years ago. And then over time, that megafauna supply dried up, and we were forced to turn farming, essentially, in order to feed our bellies.
Now, I'm sorry, Phil, I don't mean to take this off in a different direction, but I've never heard that particular description of history. Is there a thesis for why the megafauna disappeared?
The megafauna, there's just a law of animals that the larger you are, the more fat you carry. And humans are limited in how much protein we can digest and eat. So I really consider humans as fat hunters, not like animal or flesh or muscle hunters or something. So, like when a great white or an orca hunts a great white and it just eats the liver is the high fat organ in the great white. All the fat is stored in the organ, in the liver. So the same way humans are fat hunters, that allows our brain to become bigger and process and use all this energy for like planning and hunting and etc. It builds upon itself. So I think any animal that kind of becomes a fat focused carnivore is going to become more intelligent and more like highly involved compared to other animals in its family. So megafauna basically die out. The easiest megafauna, for instance, are tortoises. So it's 500 pounds of fat, right? And previously, like a lion or a tiger would come up to a tortoise and the tortoise withdraws and it can't be attacked. And then it just comes alive a few hours later. We come along, all we need to do is figure out how to break that carapace open with a rock. And suddenly an entire class of animals are now on the menu. So that could have happened a few million years ago, like Australopithecus hitting rocks onto tortoises, and suddenly you have access to 1,000 pounds of very fatty, delicious meat that you can use to evolve and become a better hunter. But this pattern evolves all throughout planet Earth as humans spread out of Africa. So the megafauna that are in certain areas exist for so long, and then humans wipe them out, and then humans get onto these smaller islands that we know humans couldn't have been to before that, and all of a sudden their megafauna dry out. Maybe we can't say they're specifically eating all of them, but somehow the megafauna die out. The most likely causes we're hungry and
We're humans.
we're too greedy to really stop ourselves and say like, all right, we go beyond this point and this species isn't coming back.
Wow.
Fascinating. Bring back the megafauna, right? I think
There's a rewilding effort, and yeah, I generally support that. It's like some Jurassic Park stuff. It'd be awesome to have our aurochs back, but a lot of those megafauna, they're too big to really farm or deal with sufficiently. Like we domesticated them down to be, wheeled. A cow at 1,500 pounds is okay. It will kill you, but you can kind of control it. But an auroch at 2,200 pounds is just going to crush you and won't care about you. And then an elephant at 20,000 pounds is just going to step on you. Yeah, but it will never happen. We'll never really bring megafauna back.
just fascinating. Where does your thesis lead to? What plans do you have, I guess, to keep developing this, or, what's next for Travis?
So right now I'm kind of job hunting. I'm doing some contract work for Sean's company now. I want to build more databases and kind of help like the science front, but also now see so much potential in AI. AI is only limited by like the data sets you can give it. So now I'm thinking like every steak is really, 50 columns of data. In actuality, there's a fat profile and a protein profile, and then how you cook it and different, all these data entries. And then AI is just the tool that's waiting to ingest all that data. I'm curious there. I want to write some articles and maybe a book. I wanted to write an article that outlines the hypothesis that we're facultative carnivores. So really just say, we have to actually consider it as scientists that humans might be all meat eating, meat and fat addicted primates, and that if we think of them as that and not just a struggling opportunist, generalist, kind of scavenger, ape, whatever is kind of like the consensus today, then a lot of things actually make sense, you know. And the megafauna being wiped out makes sense. A lot of like our adaptations to kind of be different compared to the other great apes make more sense. So I'd like to publish a paper like that. And then I would like to run carnivore science to like have a real RCT or something. And although I don't really believe that will happen, another idea I have is like another survey, kind of similar
How
to the
would you do a
Harvard survey.
randomized controlled trial of carnivore?
It wouldn't, I mean, you would just get a group of 70 or 100 people and you'd split them up and give one like a dietitian, you know, my plate guide food thing, and then another one just like a beef only diet or something. And you could either give them the meat, you could pay for the meat, you could tell them just to go to the store and only buy meat. You could give them home cooked burgers every night. You could bring them into a hotel and feed them for a month. There's many different ways, and each way has its pros and cons. You know, there's expense, but then there's also, we can't really be sure if they ate the meal,
Yeah,
if
exactly.
it wasn't, you know, precisely photographed going into their mouth. You
Humans are
know,
really hard to test that way.
yeah, yeah. And so I kind of am shocked that we're still struggling with this problem because, you know, we have these phones now. We can create an app where you can put every metric you want into it, and it can go into some kind of global database where then you can say, I eat these foods and I have this much health status or whatever, and it seems to work for me. And then, you know, you could change that. And I'm just kind of shocked that we still don't have like we have different companies trying to do that, but they're all so fragmentary and they have small data sets. And you need like one with, you know, hundreds of millions of people to kind of join their data together. And then AI says, oh, actually, look at the carnivores in this data that said they were eating less than 5% plants. They actually had the best blood work in the entire group. And these people who avoided seed oils were pretty good in comparison to everyone else. And, you know, eventually we'll figure out those things, but it's all going to be through data. It's going to be people like me thinking about like, how do we capture it before we lose it? Because, you know, also every time you get a new client into your business or your health, you know, coaching session, they're telling you data and then you're losing it right away. And then you can't compare against it down the line. So thinking about how do you turn every data point in your life into data is going to be crazy. And yeah, I'm just going to keep updating my website, meattrition.com, and posting on X. I'm keeping track of all the science in the field on keto, seed oils, carnivore, history, paleoanthropology, everything. And that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just fascinating work, and glad that there's someone out there like you that is, you know, correlating all this stuff and collating all this stuff, I should say, and giving us the resources, you know, because obviously people are curious about this, you know, and health and specifically, you know, nutrition as it relates to our health is more and more coming into the focus. And it's going to be great to be able to point people towards these resources that, you know, are interested in learning about it. Yeah, maybe give just again where people can follow the website. And then, like I said, we'll put a link to the thesis in the show notes as well.
Okay, my website is meattrition.com. So it's just a play on words for nutrition, meat instead of the new. And my X account is meattrition.com. I also have a Travis_Statham. I also have Reddit and Facebook and stuff. You can find me on there if you want to. You can figure out how.
All right, very good. You've opened all kinds of cans of worms that I would like to dig through, but we've run out of time. So we'll dig another time. We will either record it or not, but definitely
Yeah.
some interesting stuff here.
I do have many rabbit holes, I guess, in my repertoire, and it is really fun seeing people's like kind of being exposed to new information. And it's also kind of fun, like if I understand the few ones that really get your attention going, I could be like, oh, I gotta let them in on these few rabbit holes that go into fun locations. But
Yeah, definitely. All right, our guest has been Travis Statham, Meatrition, MEAT-RITION.com is probably the best place to dig into his stuff. It is a fascinating website. Holy crap. Gazillions of things to look at there, lots and lots of rabbit holes to go down. I recommend it highly. All the other information will be available on the show notes. This has been Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to y'all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.